Hello everybody, welcome back to more Sins of the Father. The new headset finally arrived and I am so happy with the audio quality, and it is much better than the one that I had stolen and borrowed off my husband, which is really good. It just means at the end of, we've probably got about a week's worth of content left from this book. And it means that it'll be nice and consistent and lovely and great. And then by next week, my lovely desktop microphone should arrive. Because when I finish this, I want to move straight on to the next book. And it's important to me that the quality is as good as possible, because there's a lot more in that book. And I want to make sure I do it justice and as best as I can. So it's been a little bit of a work in progress, this project, but it seems to be coming together well. So where we left off yesterday, Martha had fallen asleep. She was exhausted, the poor love, on Parker's sofa, and he'd taken her off and fed her up, and she got some sleep, which she needed. But sadly, the rest has to end, and maybe she's about to find out some unhappy home truths, let's put it that way. And we're going to carry on with chapter 21. Chapter 21. When Martha eventually woke, the room was dark, illuminated only by a softly lit lamp. A large pair of crimson curtains had been closed over the window, blocking out the day or the night. She had no idea how long she'd been dozing for, but found that she didn't particularly care. With all the emotional ups and downs that she'd been forced to endure over the past 24 hours, she needed the respite, as loath as she was to admit it. Yawning and stretching, she realised that somebody had placed a thin blanket over her and had removed her boots. Turning her head, she found the culprit sitting in a large chair on the other side of the room. Parker had pulled a small table across in front of him and appeared to be working from it, files and folders spread out across the surface. He changed out of what had been his work attire, dressed more casually in jeans and a black V-neck t-shirt that fit his upper body like a soft second skin. His dark hair was still ruffled, his chin still stubbly and set in determination as he focused on his work, the investigation that Martha had completely pushed to the back of her mind and didn't want to start thinking about again. Not yet. Not while she was so relaxed and they were still there together. It felt undeniably good to simply be in that moment, gazing at him. The clock turned back. Everything felt right and normal in her world again. Now that was a sentimental notion, wasn't it? As if he felt her eyes upon him, Parker lifted his attention from his work and smiled over in her direction. "Good evening," he said. "Hi," she replied almost shyly. "I fell asleep." "Yeah, I noticed that. I must have been a lot more tired than I thought." Sitting up, she stretched, waiting for her body to protest in pain, but as expected, the pull at her midsection was almost non-existent, as good as gone. She was healing well. Sleep was a wonderful booster for that, and she'd gotten plenty, it seemed. She was good to go. Only she didn't want to go anyway. Not just yet. "What time is it?" she asked Parker. "Just after 9. 9 o'clock in the evening," she smiled genuinely, surprised by how much time had passed. She'd needed it. Yawning again, she said, "Thank you for letting me sleep for so long." "That's okay," he replied. He dropped the pencil that he'd been holding on the table atop an open file, sinking back against the plush cushions of his chair. "I've been going over a few things, fact-checking stuff that the antique dealer told me because it was all so unbelievable. I tend to lean on the side of caution whenever talking to witnesses. Trust their story, but verify it, you know." "That makes a lot of sense," she agreed. "Completely forgot to ask about what happened inside that club. Sorry." "It's all right," he said. "I'm kind of glad I was able to distract you for a while. If there's one thing I've learned working at Empire, it's that you need to take a step back when it starts to get rough. I know this isn't a normal investigation, but it's been tough, far too personal. So I'm glad we were able to take some time out. We both needed it, probably more than either of us would admit. Forgive me for pointing this out, but you don't look like you've taken very much time out," Martha said, indicating his impressive pile of work, a metaphorical mountain of it laid out before him. "Yeah, I may not always practice what I preach," he retorted. "It's a known flaw. something I've been working on for a while. Rolling her neck, Martha pulled back her blanket and sat forward, planting her bared feet onto the carpeted floor. Even though she didn't want to jump back into the harsh reality of why she was back in Marytown, she asked, "Want to fill me in on what you have?" "Not really," he stated emphatically. It's not great, Martha. "Tell me something about any of this that has been." "Fair enough. But this is so much worse than all of that." Suddenly feeling extremely anxious, Martha said, "Tell me." "I'm fairly certain that he killed a woman, a magical practitioner. And by him," she swallowed down the feeling of nausea that rose in her stomach, "I assume you mean Amanda's father." Parker nodded solemnly, frowning, probably at her wording. "Okay." Martha took a deep, deep breath, blew it out, drew in another one, sighed. "It's not what I was expecting." Once again. Apologising, Parker proceeded to fill her in with all the awful details about the Cavalier Russell Beck and his alleged dealings with the dead man, which he'd been able to go on and verify through a detailed inventory of Mr. Ford's deliveries that Olivia had discovered during her indiscriminate rummaging through his study, and by calling in a request for local information about a dead female magical practitioner from his contact within the local police station. As Russell Beck had suggested, the death had been treated with a disdain that implied that the deceased had been known to the police and that they thought she had it coming. No suspects were apprehended or even questioned, and reports that she may have been stalked were not considered to be accurate. Thus far, Parker hadn't been able to prove that the information he'd been given was untrue, and while that didn't necessarily mean the art dealer was a credible witness, his pagan co-worker had found evidence that William Ford was trying to obtain similar artefacts. It seemed like Russell Beck had been telling him the truth as far as he knew it. He believed that the dead man had killed his old friend, and the evidence seemed to back it up. "I don't know if Beck's involvement ends with him simply being the one who supplied the talisman," he concluded. "But I think that if he had anything to do with Mr. Ford's death, he wouldn't still be so bitter about their broken deal, or so inclined to give up information about what, to him, was a professional embarrassment. He seemed to care a lot about appearances, and this makes him look very bad." "I wish I could have talked to him," Martha said, disgruntled. "Don't," he assured her. "He would have only upset you, and then I'd have had to punch him in his smug face and would be no longer on the guest list of his pretentious little boys' club." "Lucky you," she retorted, "making friends in such low places." "Yeah, I'm thrilled. What I think matters most now is that Mr. Ford knew that the artifact he got from Beck was capable of siphoning magical energy. I think it's safe to assume he tried to get the practitioner that Beck recommended to help him by blessing the talisman, and when she refused, he might have took it regardless." Martha wanted to say that such a thing was impossible, but she knew in her gut that it was entirely probable. William Ford was not a man that most people thought he was. He had a darker side to him, and that side didn't like to be challenged by anybody, and especially not by somebody he thought was beneath him. She'd carried the physical and emotional scars that proved it for most of her life, and now somebody had finally paid the price for it with their own. It was hard to think of that as anything other than inevitable. "What was her name?" Martha asked. Not sure she wanted to know. "The police report identifies her as Rebecca Patterson, also known in magical circles as Madame Bex. She was in her 30s, lived alone, seemed to have a decent following and clientele. I'm not entirely sure how she knew Russell Beck, but I got the feeling their history was personal, like a family friend or something like that." "How did she die?" "She was stabbed to death," he said reluctantly. "I've seen my fair share of crime photos, but this... It was bad, Martha. Probably one of the worst I've ever had to look at. It was really bad." Martha cursed under her breath several times. Sensing that she needed to focus less on the horrific thing that her estranged father had allegedly done, and more on what could be done to get some sense of justice for his many and varied crimes, Parker told her, "We now know or have a good understanding of how Mr. Ford was able to draw and power up the summoning circle. What we don't know exactly is what he summoned, and then what happened after he did. We still can't determine what caused his death." At this point, Martha wasn't even particularly convinced that she cared anymore. the universe, while often the malicious son of a bitch, tended to have a way of bringing events into balance. Karma. If William Ford had taken a life to get something that he had no entitlement to, and it had ultimately got him killed, it was hard not to think that there was some sort of justice in that outcome. But her younger sister was going to need more, and Martha needed to be able to give her something other than what they had, because whatever horror they uncovered next, she ultimately was going to have to break her sister's heart into a million pieces by revealing what they knew. They needed the full story, and that meant uncovering things that they still did not know yet about the night that he died. "What do we do now?" she asked, more than prepared to take the investigator's lead for the first time since she had ingratiated herself into it. "Olivia wants us to locate the talisman," Parker told her. "We know it was on the victim's body when the police were called to the house, and I now know all of his belongings were returned to the family once they closed the case. I called Walsh and asked Amanda about it, but she claims she never saw it. Nor does it appear to have been found anywhere inside the house." "How do you know?" Martha asked. "The place is kind of big." "Had Olivia do a full sweep of the building. She's scarily good at finding things. If she says that it probably isn't there, I believe her." "Esther," Martha declared. "We should try her. I would imagine if the police returned his belongings, then she'd most likely have been the one to collect or retrieve them." And she was... a half-disgusted sigh. She was in love with him. They were... involved. Parker looked genuinely taken aback, scrunching up his face in matching distaste and shock. "Esther and Mr. Ford? Seriously?" Martha nodded. "I confronted her about it. She packed her things and moved out of the house this morning. If she had the talisman in her possession already, then she probably took it with her. I imagine she simply assumed that it was an antique and it belonged to him, so she thought it was a keepsake. Perhaps she claimed it for herself. We can go and pay her a visit if you want." Martha released an unhappy grunt. "Yeah, we should do that. You don't want to see her. Don't worry about it. I can go." "No, it isn't that. I'll come with you. I'm just..." She sighed. "For the millionth time. I'm getting so fed up of this. I thought that I was finally free of William fucking Ford and his pit of emotionally abusive sinking sand. Guess I was being naive. I'll never be free." After a brief, tension-filled moment, Parker got up from his chair and crossed the room. He sat down next to her on the sofa, and it didn't take an empath to feel his anger, deep and reinvigorated under his skin. While he would do his damnedest to mask it, it had always been there when it came to dealing with the aftermath of the abuses that Martha, the girl he'd once loved, suffered growing up. And it had riled him once again. Of course it had. This was all so personal. "Look," he spoke as softly as he was able. "I felt awful when I first saw you this morning. It was clear you hadn't slept and had a shitty night, and I wasn't as sympathetic as I could have been back in the house when you said that you hated being there." "It isn't your fault." Martha began to shake her head. "You're damn right it's not," he retorted with a firmness that she'd almost forgotten he had in him. "But I felt that nonetheless, and I'll not sit back and watch while that man makes you feel like shit from beyond the grave. He was fucking awful to you. We were both very aware of it, and yeah, maybe now he's finally got what's coming to him. He's dead, but he's not gone, and he won't be. Not while he can still make you feel this bad." While she knew that he was right, Martha had no idea what the hell she could do to make it better. She'd vowed to get Amanda the answers that she needed, and she would, no matter how much it affected her, how badly it twisted her up inside. She could and would deal with all her personal feelings about the matter, because she had to. No matter how difficult it currently felt, she was stronger now. At least, she'd genuinely begun to believe that she was. "I'm not saying any of this to put any pressure on you," Parker said. "I know how hard it must be, having all this being dredged up now on top of everything else that you've been through. I understand. And I get why you haven't wanted to share what you told me with anyone else. Right now, as far as you see it, none of this is about you. It's not," she stated adamantly. "You want to help your sister. We all do. But you also need to be able to consider your pain and grief and all those feelings you have about him and what's happening too." With an unhappy sigh, he reached out and took one of her hands in his, cradling it between his bigger ones. "I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you want to, You can come here and stay with me. No pressure, no strings attached. Your own room. Whatever you need to get through this. I'm more than happy for this to be a safe place for you, Martha. Just like my house was when we were kids and you needed to get lost. It's nothing more than I've always done for you, okay? For such a long time, Martha had no idea what to say. What to say to what was on so many levels such an incredible and heartfelt offer. It was so true that when they'd been growing up, at times when she was terribly hurt and unhappy at home, in spite of all the wonderful things that her mother did to try and make her better, she had needed that safe space. And Michael Parker, with the support of his amazingly loving and supportive parents, had been that for her for such a long time. Now he wanted to be that again, and she wanted to let him. Nodding, she answered, I think I'd like that. Good, he smiled, seeming genuinely relieved. We'll go and see Esther together, hopefully get the talisman and talk to Olivia about what she wants to do regarding the summoning circle once we have it. Whatever she's got planned, I think she wants to do it tonight. She's not happy about the thing still being there, maybe active. She's not the only one, Martha said. And while she wasn't sure she wanted to spend a lot more time with the beautiful blonde pagan, she agreed that the sooner they got that thing out of her family's home, the better. This had to come to an end, and Olivia Maxwell had the knowledge and skills to bring it to a definite conclusion. Anything else couldn't matter. There was, as there had always been, more important things, and it was time to get back to it. The wicked, it seemed, did not get to rest forever. Okay, so another chapter down. It's a relatively short one, but I'm not going to carry on because the next chapter is quite long, quite deep and involved. So I'm going to leave it there for today. First time reading quite a bit with this these headphones are so huge, I can barely hear myself. So it feels really strange, but I'm sure that it's great. It's really weird. It's going to take a little bit of getting used to, and then by the time that I do, I'm going to have the desktop microphone. But yeah, it's interesting. It's a new experience. So Martha now knows about what transpired at the club and what Russell Beck accused William Ford of. And yeah, she took it perhaps not as angrily as one might have expected. She's kind of internalized a lot of things, and I think that says a lot about her childhood and her status as somebody that he perhaps wasn't very nice to when she was younger, and she's kind of taken it all on her shoulders. And Parker seems to be there wanting to help alleviate that in any way that he can without putting pressure on her, which is nice. He's nice. He's a good boy. Yes. So yeah, the wicked don't get to rest forever, unfortunately. And Martha is eager to push this to its conclusion and get it over and done with, and try and figure out once and for all what's happened and what they're going to do about it. So yes, I will be back tomorrow with more Sins of the Father, and we will find out what happens next. There's still a bit to go. Yeah, and it's exciting, and I know what comes next, and I can't wait to read it. So yeah, come back and join me tomorrow, and see you then.